Welcome back, Honors. All right, I hope y'all have enjoyed your break. That was fantastic. I hope you all had a great Easter. I hope you all had some time with your families, some time to relax a little bit, to kind of try and put away some of that work stuff and get kind of geared back up for school again. Because as we know, we're going right back into our online stuff. And stay tuned for emails and stuff discussing a lot of big important announcements coming up. One of the biggest ones happens to be the book, okay? So we are going to start reading All Quiet on the Western Front as of Thursday. That'll be our first one, and your first chapter quiz will be on our next class, or will be over the weekend, okay? Over that weekend. And it's not hard. There's a lot of little intricate stuff that we're going to be doing. Instead of writing a paper, we're going to be doing a discussion board. That'll actually help us kind of flesh out some new ideas, you know what I mean? Kind of discuss with each other. I'm going to actually mix up your classes in these discussion boards, so it's not just going to be E talking to E and G talking to G. It's going to be everybody talking to everybody, and it's going to be really, really neat. I'm excited about it. So y'all should be excited about it. I'm very excited about it. It's a phenomenal book. Do not read it, okay? Remember what my wife said. She loved it. I love it. It's a good book. Give it a chance, and we'll really take some time to really discuss it, get into it, and really understand it on a deeper level, okay? So we already took a flip right before break talking about the state of Europe and European thought going into World War I, how this idea that the 20th century, the earliest 20th century from 1900 to 1913 is not a peaceful time of, oh, nobody saw war coming. No, it's actually a very chaotic time. Scientific views are changing. Don't forget Marie Curie and Albert Einstein. And Sigmund Freud. Artistic interpretations are changing because there are more art buyers out there because of the Industrial Revolution. I.e., remember your Van Goghs, remember your Picasso's, their early works, stuff like that. Just talking about how art has dramatically changed from its romantic predecessor in the 1800s going into modern art and culture. And then we also discussed kind of the craziness that was Europe, right? We talked about the Dreyfus Affair, how if you were a political figure, there was a good solid chance you were going to get shot, right? All kinds of other intense stuff. But now we're getting into the causes and the Great War itself, right? So the Great War, World War I, of course, spanning from 1914 to 1918, is going to have heavy, heavy themes, and it's going to have a lot of different, very, very kind of crazy, intense, classical figures in it, talking about a lot of these different individuals that actually ran these countries and things like that. So we need to go ahead and get into this. So if you want to go ahead and put a header in your notes that we're now getting into World War I, which is one of my favorite things to teach. I love it. I'm super interested in it. I have read up on it. It's probably one of my more expertise areas. All right. So now getting into it, though, the Great War, World War I, is going to have some big, big themes. Now, some of the biggest themes that you may have already heard of is the concept of trench warfare. Now, first and foremost, trench warfare did not originate in World War I. It's not the very first time it had ever been seen. It was actually first seen in this thing called the Crimean War, which is actually between Russia and the other great powers of Europe. Now, trench warfare was a reaction to the industrial nature war was taking on. So you have to understand war was evolving, okay? It was evolving because it is now the World War I, the Crimean War, as well as the Balkan Wars that all came right after the Industrial Revolution are direct reactions to the changing face of war, right? So this, for example, is down the road a little bit. This is closer to 1916, 1917 while the war is going on, but poisonous gas is going to become a major, heavily debated weapon topic during World War I. And we will talk more about that as well. We'll talk about it in your discussion boards as well. And like I said, it is most defined by the industrial aspects, the Maxim machine gun, which we're going to talk about hopefully in this flip. If not in this flip, then in tomorrow's flip, Thursday's flip. So you've got mass casualties now. You've got people being eviscerated by fully automatic weapons, by breech-loading rifles. The muskets are now gone. We have now adopted bolt-action rifles that are known as breech-loading rifles, okay? So getting further and further into it, though, you also are seeing the change in nature of war as in its, chaotic scarring in a sense, both physical and mental. We will talk about mental scarring as well, i.e. shell shock or the earliest forms of post-traumatic stress disorder coming up after this war. Now, this is some of the physical scarring. That right there is a disease you could get from being in the trenches for too long. That is trench foot. Change your socks, ladies. It's disgusting, all right? So this is actually the decaying flesh of someone who's still alive who has trench foot. As you can see, it's blistering, scarring, and of the eventual peeling away of the skin. Sometimes they have to amputate your feet. Now, of course, like I said, this is the endearing, likely understanding of World War I that you'll have in the back of your mind is, oh, it was trench warfare everywhere. It really wasn't. It was only on the Western Front. We'll talk about that stuff more as we get into it, but let's go ahead and go, all right? So it's a very, very technological warfare, okay? So that's a big theme. Trench warfare and modern warfare is the other big theme, all right? So now let's get into the causes of the war. Some of y'all immediately are like, but I thought they were the main causes, like militarism, alliances, and blah, 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 blah. Yes, but I'm not going to discuss them in any particular order. I'm going to mix them up a little bit, all right? Due to the fact that these things are all happening kind of with and without each other, not in a necessarily linear fashion, like militarism didn't start, and then alliances started, and then imperialism started. As we know, imperialism and nationalism have been going on the entire time. So getting into it, though, the causes of this war, we're going to start with the big one. The alliance system, okay? We cover that and militarism in this flip. That's impressive, all right? So if not, we'll be okay. All right, now the alliance systems that were being created in Europe during the early 19th century, late 19th century, early 20th century, are going to be one of the big dominoes that sends Europe into war, right? Now, an alliance, what it is, just so you know, is an allegiance or agreement formed for mutual benefit. It's the idea, hypothetically, that I was like, I'm going to align myself with Mr. Wooderson and Mr. Bethune in case we ever go to war, we'll have each other's backs, right? So, like, that's an alliance system, okay? Now, just so you know, the alliances weren't just all of a sudden like, oh, we got these guys versus these guys. It's not like that. They actually were slowly evolving. And they were really crazy at first because a lot of the guys that end up fighting each other later on, early on, had alliances with each other. And some of you are scratching your head and you're like, that doesn't make any sense. You got to understand the narrative, okay? So getting into the historical aspects before we get into the historical fiction aspects of All Quiet on the Western Front and the actual tale of a soldier in the trenches during this war, you got to understand that this whole war starts off with this big cat, Bismarck, right? It all starts off with Bismarck. Otto von Bismarck being the leader of the new German Empire. Well, not the technical leader, but the chancellor of the new German Empire, the second, like, the right-hand man of Kaiser Wilhelm I, is going to create some of these alliances early on to try and avoid huge war. His objective was to try and avoid a war like World War I. He's like, if we have these big alliances, these grand alliances, it'll prevent us from ever being able to go to war with each other. Because that way, if we have a giant group over here and a giant group over there, then we will never dare actually fight with one another because it'll destroy the entire continent. He created the very first alliance called the League of Three Emperors Alliance. Now, this original alliance was between Austria, Russia, and Germany, okay? So Austria is in the Austro-Hungarian Empire, Russia is in the Russian Empire, and Germany is in the Germanic Empire at the time, okay? So you have to understand, though, what's going to end up going down is however it fell. However, it's going to fall dramatically due to the fact that Russia and Austria could not agree on how to control one specific area. It's called the Balkans, all right? So the Balkans. Now, the Balkans are full of these people known as Slavs, all right? S-L-A-V-S, Slavs. So you have to understand that the Slavic people were being ruled over by Ottomans, Austrians, and a lot of other people. Now, Russians are also Slavs, okay? But they're a huge Slavic empire. So they were supporting all these little Slavs, like Serbia and Bosnia and Bulgaria and those guys. They were allies with them. They were like, oh, you deserve your own country. You are Slavic people, just like us. You speak a Slavic language. You use the Cyrillic alphabet. You do not need to be quarantined or quartered or owned by any other empire like Austro-Hungarians or Ottomans. You deserve to be your own thing. So Russia was supporting them. So this original League of Three Emperors starts to fall apart. And the biggest reason that it fell apart completely is because of this idiot right here, which we're going to get into the other guys here in about 2 seconds. That's Kaiser Wilhelm II, who takes over after Wilhelm I dies. That's his son. And he fires Bismarck and he pushes Russia out. He literally, before this alliance, see, these alliances had to be re-signed and rehashed out every few years, and he refused to let them re-enter it. He just didn't invite them back into it. He was like, oh, we don't need you. Well, I'll create my own new alliance. And he creates his own alliance later on after France signs an alliance with Russia, which is very, very uncommon. You never ever heard about Russia and France ever really aligning together because, like, the last time France and Russia interacted was when Napoleon tried to invade, okay? So, as you can see, Kaiser Wilhelm II took over, fired Bismarck, and pushed Russia out. Now what we're going to need to do, I need you to hit pause for like 2 seconds and take a step back and be like, okay, he's getting weird. Why is he doing all this stuff crazy out of order? Where are we about to go? Well, look, as you can tell, we just brought in Kaiser Wilhelm II. We just talked about Bismarck and how he's now been officially dismissed and now he's been fired by him. So we have a lot of different world leaders right now that y'all don't know. Like, I'm saying Russia and Austria ally with each other, but right now I bet not a one of you could tell me who the leaders of those countries were at this time. This is very important. So what we need to do, inside your notes, it can be up above close to the top, it can be over to the right, it can be underneath this stuff as we get more into these alliance systems, because as this is like the first one that kind of fell apart and then reorganized itself. Now we need to get into who led these countries, okay, before we go any further with these evolving alliance systems. So, first and foremost, let's talk about these different people. Okay, so you're going to end up with several different quote-unquote teams after these alliance systems all hash themselves out, okay? Now, you're going to end up with several figures that lead over these places, okay? So let's go ahead and get into them a little bit. Now, before we even get there, this is okay for you to know the alliances before they're formed, okay? It's really okay. This is kind of like an outline of the alliances before we even talk about them. Let's treat it like that. This is an outline of the alliances before we talk about how they were formed. So the very first alliance system that's going to be formed, and we'll go back in time in our next flip tomorrow and talk about like where it came from, was known as the Central Powers, okay? And the Central Powers included these following 3 groups. The German Empire being the big one, right? Kaiser Wilhelm II with his dead arm that hung by his side. It was his left arm. So yeah, his left arm just kind of hung there dead, and he just couldn't move it or anything like that. And so I like to imagine that if he would have like had a hook put on the end of it, he could have really slapped the living daylights out of somebody. Now, anyway, you get a lot of torque. All right, so Kaiser Wilhelm II is going to be the guy that rules over them. Okay, we're going to get into their names again here in a minute. Austro-Hungarian Empire, or the Austria-Hungary Empire, is going to be the other group in the Central Powers. And then the other major one is the Ottoman Empire, okay? Now, there are 3 key people in this Central Power mashup before we even talk about them that you need to know. One of them being Wilhelm II, which we just kind of got into a little bit. Dead arm guy, right? Sweet mustache. Franz Joseph, okay? Franz Joseph is this guy right here. He's the Austro-Hungarian autocrat king. I don't think they call him a Kaiser, but I think he's just the king of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, or the Austro-Hungarian Emperor. And Franz Joseph is a Habsburg, okay? Wilhelm II is a Hohenzollern, Franz Joseph being a Habsburg, leading over these new countries. Franz Joseph's a very interesting figure. He is the grandson of the last Holy Roman Emperor that was actually ousted by Napoleon. He's a Habsburg. He is a very, very, very interesting figure because he was actually a very good king. He wasn't a bad guy. He believed in creating this dual monarchy with Hungary so they could have an actual equal representation within this, sort of equal representation. And he was a much more generous figure. He was alive during Victoria's reign. He was much older than Wilhelm II, much, much older than he was. And he believed in some of these liberal ideas, even though he was an empire autocrat of Austria-Hungary. He also was a very tortured figure. His wife, his one love, Elizabeth, his wife, Queen Elizabeth, also known as Sisi, was dead from an assassin Italian anarchist, stabbed her to death with a file. She was beautiful, too. Absolutely gorgeous. If you want to look her up, just look up Queen Elizabeth of Austria. She was stabbed to death in a crowd coming out of a theater by an Italian anarchist. So he's a very, very tortured figure. He also, though, has a nephew. That's his second in line, and that's Franz Ferdinand, and he's right here. And if any of y'all know anything about World War I, this guy's going to come up. He's going to be a major figure in this entire thing, okay? But that's Franz Ferdinand. That's the guy that's his nephew that's supposed to take over if and when he dies, all right? So Franz Ferdinand and Franz Joseph are like the leaders of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. Those three figures are all very, very important. Franz Joseph being a great leader, Franz Ferdinand being an idiot. Franz Ferdinand actually said in several different situations, he was like, this idea of liberty is a failed experiment. He wanted to go back to absolutism. So he is actually much more of a crass, mean ruler, kind of a lot like Wilhelm II was, okay? Wilhelm II was very obsessed with his image. He would, like, read news reports about him to see what people thought about him and stuff. He's kind of a lot like, he reminds me, he has, like, personality elements of Louis XVI, but not as, like, sad and pitiful, all right? So, anyway, now, last one, you don't really need to know him. I'm never going to talk about him other than right now. Mehmed V is the leader of the Ottoman Empire. Moving on. So then you have the Allies, which the Allies are going to be led by these main figures. The United States, okay? Now, the Ottoman Empire, by the way, doesn't come in until 1914. If you want to put 1914 right next to their name, that'd be awesome. So the Allies are made up of the United States, France, Great Britain, and Russia. Okay? Now, the United States doesn't really get officially involved in World War I. Not officially involved, as in boots on the ground and troops going in, until late 1917, 1918. And we sent a lot of guys. We're talking about 2 million soldiers in your face. So, very, very quick. But the United States wasn't involved. We were neutral up until 1917. So go ahead and write that down there as well. Neutral until 1917. Then you got France being led by two different figures that I will barely talk about at all. And you have Russia and Great Britain led by several different figures that I'll talk about a lot. All right, so now, first of all, the United States, the president of the United States during this time period is Woodrow Wilson, okay? Formerly coming after Taft and then also after Teddy Roosevelt. Teddy, Taft, Woodrow, okay? Woodrow Wilson is literally going to make his campaign speech and slogan in the early parts of this era of history. He kept us out of the war. So he actually kept the United States out of the war for quite some time. So that's a big thing about Woodrow Wilson. He's a major player as time goes on. So you need to have him star next to him or something like that. These two guys, I could care less about. That's Poincaré and Clemenceau. Poincaré is the prime minister of France before this guy takes over, Clemenceau, who looks like the Lorax. All right, so getting into it, though, I will barely talk about them. But that's the guys who are leading them. They do deserve equal justice if you're going to be talking about these other ones. Now, the other three figures, you got George V of England and you got Tsar Nicholas II of Russia. Now, underneath George V, you do need to put in parentheses David, D-A-V-I-D, Lloyd, L-L-O-Y-D, George, G-E-O-R-G-E. That's the Prime Minister of Great Britain when World War I officially breaks out, okay? So, because remember, the King of England at this time is more of a figurehead than he is an actual ruler. But Tsar Nicholas II, on the other hand, is still basically an autocrat. So let's really, really quickly take 2 seconds and kind of go a little bit further with something. Is anybody a little bit weirded out by the fact that Tsar Nicholas II and George V of Great Britain and Russia look very, very similar? Yeah. Funny how this all worked out. Queen Victoria was the leader of England during the 1800s. From early 1800s to 1901, I believe she died, 1901, leading to George V taking over. This guy, and this guy are all her grandsons, all right? So Queen Victoria's grandsons, she married them in to other areas of Europe and pilfered them, or took her sons, actually, and had them marry off into royalty in other parts of Europe. And her grandsons are going to be the 3 leaders of 3 of the most powerful countries in the world. But then, ironically enough, that means that all of these guys are cousins, and they still ended up going to war with each other, which is absolutely insane. All right, so now, anyway, so I like to talk about that just so you can see the interconnectedness of these people and all this other stuff, but we will get into this more later on. This was like a little outline of the leaders and kind of getting into the alliance system leading up to this, and kind of a regular warning being like, hey, make sure you have your book. We're going to start reading it and stuff like that soon. Pay close attention to your emails. I'll see you guys later. Y'all have a great one.